Yo, what's going on, you guys? This is AllDaddy1 and I'm going to be giving you guys another New World build video. So this build video I'm going to be giving you guys is going to be the spear builds. So the spear in general is one of the strongest weapons in the game, or strongest builds in the game. Obviously it's not going to be anywhere near as strong as like the rapier builds, but it is pretty strong compared to a greatsword build. But if you have the Serenity is still going to be slightly more DPS than a completely based spear. Now, all in all, the spear is going to be 100% needed in a group comp no matter what you're doing in terms of PvE. If you're doing the raid, you need to have a spear in your group. If you're doing M3s or M2s, M1s you can get away with it, M2s I guess you could technically get away with it, but M3s you want a spear. In the 20-man trial, like the worm, you need a spear. And the reason why is because the spear applies a lot of rend and weaken by itself alone, as well as also doing a lot of DPS. So we're going to be going over all the different types of spear builds that you can have, and obviously the different types of spears that you will want. So let's go ahead and get right into it. Alright, so first things first is going to be your attributes. So the reason why my strength is at 311 and not 350 is because I use strength food. I use the banana bread to get me at 350, but you want to reach 350 strength and then go for 250 dex, 25 int. You don't need to put anything into focus. I just put it into focus. But realistically, once you get to 700 gear score and higher, or if you're at the complete highest, 725, you're going to want to have 350 strength, 300 dex, and then 50 int, so that way you can get the whatever this perk is, 5% base damage increase to targets inflicted with the damage over time effect, and then that is it. You won't go for anything else. Now, obviously, most of us are not going to be at 725, so this is kind of a pretty nice spot for most builds. Again, you don't have to go for the 5% cooldown reduction in focus, and then just throw more into dex, so you can be at like 365, 375 dex, 350 strength. And this is just how it goes overall. Now, if you're doing something like Lazarus, if you're in the dungeon Laz, or if you're doing any dungeon or fights where the boss doesn't have a back, like it's a backless boss, because bosses or enemies that have a back guarantees a crit. So if you go against anything with a back, no back I mean, you want to go for 350 dex, because that's just going to give you 15% crit chance while you are empowered. And then, so basically the two stats would switch, the strength and the dex. These two would basically switch. Only, again, if you are going against the boss that has no back. So a snake-like boss does not have a back. The final boss in the Hive dungeon does not have a back. The worm does have a back, but it's pretty iffy on that. So I'm not entirely sure whether you go 350 dex for that or not. Now, for your weapon mastery, this is the weapon mastery. This is how I have mine set up. And this is because I switch between Cyclone and Sweep a lot. So ideally, this is how you're going to end up having it. Now, if you know for sure you're never going to ever use Sweep, you can just get rid of these 3 points and then put it into something like Evasive Maneuvers, Strong Conditions, and Unerring Precision. So you can do 20% more damage against enemies with Grit if you do find an enemy that, has Grit. Now, again, I would just recommend going with this setup though, but yeah. And also with this current update, Sweep is kind of an iffy skill to use now, because some enemies just are not able to be swept for some reason anymore, like in comparison to the last season where almost every single regular mob could be swept. Even some of the named mobs could be still swept or knocked down and CC'd. So that's why a lot of us have kind of like swapped from using Sweep to using Cyclone for the stamina gain, as well as the health as well from leeching Cyclone. Javelin is a pretty good skill to have as well, um, because like if you do the Hive raid, having Sweep and Javelin is pretty good for them because those birds can be knocked down. So you can kind of keep those birds CC'd with Sweep and Javelin. Vault Kick is okay. I just wouldn't really recommend it for anyone because it's just such a long animation, and a lot of times you can miss with this, and it doesn't really provide any true damage. All it really does at the last one is it gets your cooldowns back faster. But the thing is, Spear already has pretty fast cooldowns, especially with aggressive maneuvers. If you dodge in between attacks, you'll get your cooldowns back fast. And even then, it's kind of like you don't really need this. You can just use refreshing jabs, as it'll give you. It's a 10% cooldown per hit with a light attack. So either way, like you technically don't really need this skill either. You can just take this off and put it here for the extension of the debuffs if you wanted that, or you can go with Unerring Precision, or if you wanted more stamina regen, you can go Strong Conditions. Like it all, that's pretty much it. But I just kept it aggressive maneuvers just because sometimes I do dodge in between my attacks. Now, for your offhand, you have a massive bundle of offhands you can use as a spear user, and it really depends. But the most popular offhand is going to be the Great Axe. So the reason why the Great Axe is the most popular offhand for a spear user is because spear users are technically the utility DPSers, which means they also need to make sure they have their offhand as utility for mobs. And having the Great Axe is the most ideal offhand to have for mobs because you can use Reap to pull the enemies, you can use Maelstrom to tighten up clumps. Right now, I'm not entirely sure though, but in the previous update, previous patch, Maelstrom actually used to mess up clumps and kind of declump mobs. So it's kind of a thing right now where you don't use Maelstrom if the clump is already pretty tight. You use Maelstrom if they're kind of like a bit separated. And then you obviously have your gravity well. You would throw your grav, and then it would just clump the mobs, and then you would go in and reap any mob that's on the outside of the clump, or use Maelstrom. I have charge here. I have 2 points to charge because I just wanted to get Bloodlust because it allows me to move faster. You will never use Mauler's Fury because it requires you to use your Great Axe to attack, and you're never going to swing your Great Axe pretty much ever in a dungeon with, or just in general. You'll never use the Mauler's Fury. The reason why you use Bloodlust is not for the Empower, but because of the 20% movement speed. If you're running behind mobs, because you guys are skipping mobs, or you're following the tank, but there's mobs behind the tank, or whatever it is, you could just take the Great Axe out and just run behind mobs, and it'll kind of allow you to catch up. And the next offhand as well is going to be the Warhammer. So there's going to be some cases where having a Great Axe is nice, but if you are a second spear user in your group, you don't. I mean, obviously having two grab wells is going to be nice, but in certain cases, you only really need one Great Axe user, and sometimes it's nice to have a second hammer because the tank will be on hammer. So what you'll end up doing is you'll run a Wrecking Ball, Shockwave, and Clear Out, and then these are the perks you'll end up using as well. Are the passives. I have Armor Breaker for the Rend, so I can just make the swap between Wrecking Ball and Armor Breaker. And this is also kind of like how you would use your tank hammer build, or tank hammer build, but your offhand for your tank. So you can swap between Wrecking Ball and Armor Breaker because Armor Breaker applies 30% Rend for 10 seconds, which is pretty massive. And then the next one is going to be the Flail. So for Flail, you're not going to go with Barrage. This is just how I have it set up for tanking, but you're not going to go Barrage. You're going to either go Smite or Trip. And the reason why for Trip is because it's just extra CC, and it can also apply Rend and Fortify on yourself. And then, and I'm pretty sure it does Empower for your allies. Yeah, right here. Allies that hit the affected enemy will reduce the duration of. Oh no, never mind. But yeah, anyways, Trip can trip multiple enemies if they're kind of clumped up, which is pretty nice. Warding Bludgeon is super important because it allows you to apply Fortify on you and your allies within a certain radius. And then Arcane Vortex because it allows you to cleanse and give movement speed to your group as well as empower. And then you would go Arcane Smite instead of Barrage. So if you don't go Trip, you would go Arcane Smite just for the what's it called? The Deflecting Frailty, which is weakening, as well as the Lifesteal. And then the last ones, well, I guess not really the last ones, you have other options like the hatchet and the bow. So for the hatchet tree, what you would end up doing here is you would just run a throw setup. And I'm pretty sure it's this. I think I need this too, actually. Yeah, I do need that, so I would have to get rid of... I think I would just get rid of the crit chance. No, I'd get rid of the stamina. There. So this is how you would have your rending or your hatchet throw set up. If you use it as an offhand for spear as well. Because there are going to be times where you won't be able to get in melee range with the mobs. So you'd have to swap to a hatchet. And then, so you could just throw the hatchet. And the hatchet and the spear kind of share similar stats. Spear is more, it's 90% dex, 65% strength, where the hatchet is the opposite. But with this, you're basically going to use Infected Throw for the extra weakening as well as disease that it can apply. And then Rending Throw applies Rend, which is, pretty self-explanatory. It's 20% extra Rend. And then Berserk, just so you can have the damage output. And then, it's not really my favorite, but you have the bow. So the bow, you wouldn't run these two skills. What you would end up doing is explosive, rain, and poison shot. And the reason why is because these can also apply dots. They apply damage over time. So if you are a spear bow user and you really, really like using the bow, I would recommend just going explosive shots, rain of arrows, and poison shots. Here, let me just actually go ahead and do this for you guys. And then crit. No, not that. I'll just put this point there. Crit chance. Don't really need the lifesteal on that. There's that. Duration debuff is important. 10% more damage. And then hitting a headshot equals rend. We don't need to slow them. We'll probably end up getting the haste. Yeah. Alright, so this is how your damage over time tree would end up looking like when it comes to your bow. If you run a bow. I'm not a big fan of, I love the bow, but I wouldn't really recommend having a bow unless you're doing like the raid, I guess. Then that's different. But anyways, now we're going to go into the gear. Alright, so now for your gear, it's pretty simple. Like, you want to have Enchanted Word pretty much on every piece. If you are running Attuned Leather Pants, you cannot have Enchanted Word, unfortunately, because of Elemental Aversion. But you can still have 4 out of 5 Enchanted Word. Enchanted Word is important because it applies pretty much straight up damage reduction against the NPC enemies, because even their abilities count as light and heavy attacks. So that is why you want to make sure you have Enchanted Word, because you can have up to basically 16% damage reduction. If you don't have if you don't wear Attuned Leather Pants and you're wearing something else, like I don't really know any other. I guess you could use like the winged leather boot or shoes, or if you're using like Nature's Wrath, I wouldn't recommend Nature's Wrath, but if you were to run anything else, you could probably put Enchanted Word, which would allow you to have 5 out of 5 Enchanted Word. And then for your spear, the spears kind of differ. So again, if you are going against an enemy that doesn't really have a back, it would be ideal to have as much crit chance as possible. So keen, vicious, enfeebling, skewer. So this is my skewer spear, and then obviously like I still go with soul pollen on my ring instead of a keen awareness ring. Even though I want more crit chance, I'm not going to get rid of that thrust damage because soul pollen is still ideally the best perk to have or ring to have. So I'm using Inferno as my offhand, but this was in the raid, and this is for the bosses. It's not for like mobs or anything. And the reason why I use Inferno as my offhand is because it gives me a 15% increased damage whenever you hit a target, or whenever you're within 15 meters of a target, which makes Inferno probably the best offhand artifact to have for melee DPSs. The other really nice option for an artifact is the Sin Hatchet. I don't have it on this character, I just never bothered farming for it. But the reason why Sin is a good artifact as well for an offhand is because it increases or extends the duration of your debuffs by, I think it's 20%. So it's pretty nice to have that. You're not going to use the Butcher as an offhand, even though it extends the bleeds by 33%, because you're always going to be able to apply Skewer, and that applies bleed, so it doesn't matter. You can have the Pestilence as an offhand if you want to apply the disease and poison. Freya's is also a very good offhand in terms of like how I was talking about the throwing hatchet build. This is what you would end up using. And then there is the Boltcaster, but I wouldn't worry about using Boltcaster because it doesn't provide you anything. And Boltcaster's, it's kind of an okay, I would say it's pretty good of a bow, but I just wouldn't really care for it. I guess when it comes to bows, you just want something. You're only using it for the damage over time, so it doesn't really matter what the damage it does as long as it's a high gear score and it has a diamond on it. For the great axes, if you're going to use Maelstrom, Enfeebling Maelstrom is needed 100% on your great axe, but it doesn't really matter what other perks you have on it as long as it's just Enfeebling Maelstrom. And then for the, what was the other option? Oh, the other offhand, if you don't have the Inferno from doing Forge Mutation, would be the Finisher offhand, because you're always going to apply bleed with your Skewer. And then if you run Sweep, if you do Bleeding Sweep, you're going to want to have, or if you do Sweep, you want to make sure you have the Bleeding Sweep perk on your gear. Now, if you are not the Enfeebling Skewer user, meaning you're the second spear person in your group, you won't use Bleeding Sweep on your gear, you'll instead use it on your spear. I don't know if I have a spear with it on me right now. I do not. Well, it's in my storage, but you would want to use it on your weapon instead, because instead of it being around a 10% bleed of your weapon damage for 8 seconds, it'll be roughly around 16%, which is pretty nice. And then the best in slot, like the actual best in slot perks to have, would be Distained Infliction, and I don't even know if you can actually put attunement on, actually, because I mean we just don't have the resources to do that yet. But pretty much Distained Infliction, Bleeding Sweep, or Enfeebling Skewer, and either you can do, not Keenly Jagged, I guess you can do Keenly Jagged or Keen, because you can't put Vicious on, unfortunately, because Distained Infliction counts as the damage perk, or it's in the same damage pool as Vicious and Rogue, but it's just more consistent DPS with Distained Infliction compared to Vicious and Rogue. Rogue is probably going to be better if the enemy has a back, but that's really it. That's why I think Distained Infliction is still going to be the highest DPSing perk to have on your weapons in general. Now, obviously, you can only get Distained Infliction if you dismantle the Hoplite weapons, which would end up giving you the poisonous nectars. And now, if you don't have the Hoplite Spear or those poisonous nectars, you can just simply get a keen, vicious, Enfeebling Skewer, Spear, or Bleeding Sweep Skewer. You can get one that looks like this with Vicious, or Rogue with keenly Jagged, or just like this. So it really varies on the types of spears that you get, but that's pretty much it for your spears. You would either use Enfeebling Skewer or Bleeding Sweep. And then the two most important perks, or I guess three most important perks, would be to have, where is it? My gloves. I have right here. Fortifying Perforate is very useful to have on your gear. It's not important to have it, but it does increase your survivability a lot more, because you get 9.9% fortify per strike with Perforate, so you're basically getting around 30% fortification when you use Perforate. But again, it's not the most important perk. The most important perks is going to be Bleeding Sweep if you're running Sweep, and Leeching Cyclone if you're doing Cyclone. So I also want to mention that there are different spears you can actually get from the Gypsum Kiln as well that can help out if you are still looking for a spear. Now, there are no spears that come with the Enfeebling Skewer, but you could still get a spear like the Bramble Branch, because it comes with Keen and Keenly Jagged, and its dex, it'll be 700 gear score. So if you do Genesis 4 days in a row and dismantle all the named items and such, and then you craft the Bramble Branch, hopefully you'll get Enfeebling Skewer on it. And even if you don't, I mean, it's not going to be the end of the world. There are other options as well, like the Spear of the Defender. This one can give you it has a chance of giving you Enfeebling Skewer as well, since it's a vicious, keenly fortified, which is okay. Vicious is great, and then hopefully you get something like Enfeebling Skewer on it. And then the Vicious Slayer. Vicious Slayer is an okay option. Has Trenchant Strikes. You're not really gonna heavy attack that often with your spear, but again, it's just a free spear. And then Fire Poker is also a nice option because keen and keenly empowered, which would basically get you to empower cap. And that's pretty much it, I believe. Yeah, I mean, there's also the Azoth Crystal Spears, which has Keen Vicious, but you have to do mutations in order to get your dense mutated materia. And then I don't think Glacial Tarn gives a good spear either. Oh no, it's Keen and Keenly Empowered, so you can also do Glacial Tarn, do those daily quests in order to get your materia, so you can get a spear. So all those dungeons I've basically just named off, you want to make sure you do those daily dungeons, because I mean, again, they're just dailies, and you get 1,000 dense materia for those specific dungeons, and then you would just have to do it 4 days in a row. I mean, it doesn't have to be in a row, but just 4 days in total to get enough materia, because they all cost 4,500, and then you would just be able to buy your spear. And the other option that you can obviously do is go to Cutlass Keys. And when you go to Cutlass Keys, go to the chest. I'll just go there now. You go to the doubloons chest and try to gamble for a spear. Now, you're not guaranteed at getting a spear. It can give you any two-handed weapon, so you can get a greatsword, you can get a warhammer, you can get a great axe, etc., etc. But it's still sort of a free option. I don't know if I can squeeze through here. I cannot. It is still pretty much a free option. Oh, it's right here. But again, it is a gamble. I don't think I have any doubloons anyways to purchase it. Yeah, you wouldn't get this spear either anyways because Penetrating Empowered is only a PvP perk. Oh no, this is fire stuff. Same thing, Penetrating Empowered, you wouldn't get that. Where is it? Right here. So you would need 250 Mystic Doubloons, and as you can see, it's open to acquire 1 Greatsword, Great Axe, Spear, or Warhammer up to 710 gear score. Item is guaranteed to be legendary. It's not guaranteed to be 710 though, just keep that in mind. It's going to be between 690 and 710, or 695 and 710. And again, you're not guaranteed at getting the spears, and even if you do get a spear, you're not guaranteed on getting a the perks you would want. But I mean, it is another free way of doing that. But yeah, that's pretty much it for this video. Hopefully this helped you guys out. If it did, go and leave a like, comment, subscribe. If you have any questions or concerns, let me know down in the comment section as well, and I will try my best to help you guys out to the best of my ability. I will also show you guys some spear gameplay as well. I joined a pug raid, and it obviously, like most pug raids, you just don't clear the dungeon or even the first boss. We almost cleared the first boss, and I was just like, I had to mute the tank because he was just being super toxic to everybody. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Hopefully this helped you guys out. If it did, go leave a like, comment, subscribe, and I will see you guys next time. Peace.
Aren't even having a break with the stamina, by the way. You deal stamina damage when you're on the pillar.